Elias Rourke arrived in Liverpool with nothing but a forged passport and a plan so precise it could rewrite the city's criminal map. Declan Moore, the fallen king of the docks, saw in him a second chance at power, unaware he was signing a deal with the devil. Kane Doyle moved the shipments, Logan Fry whispered betrayal, and Harvey Quinn, the undercover agent, watched it all unravel from the shadows. By the time the smoke cleared, the American crew had vanished, but their empire still haunted the streets like a ghost that refused to die. Please subscribe for daily new update of gang crime story and watch till end. In 2014, Liverpool's docks seemed ordinary to anyone passing by. Cargo ships, fog on the water, and tired men loading containers at dawn. But beneath the noise and salt air, something new was moving. It started quietly, with the arrival of a man named Elias Rourke, a strategist from Miami who had spent years building routes for the American crew, one of the most feared syndicates in the United States. Elias wasn't a street criminal. He was a thinker, a man who spoke less and planned more. He understood that Europe was the next frontier, and Liverpool, with its aging docks and loose port controls, was the perfect entry point. It had history, access, and corruption, deep enough to hide anything. Elias arrived under a fake identity, posing as a businessman in maritime logistics. From his rented office overlooking the Mersey River, he studied everything: who controlled the docks, who could be bribed, who had debts, and who had influence. Within a few weeks, he found his perfect contact: Kane Doyle, a dock worker who had been fired years earlier for theft and had since made a living running small-time smuggling jobs. Kane knew every blind spot at the port and every man willing to look the other way. For the right price, he became Elias's first recruit in Liverpool. Their first operation was small, just a test. A container supposedly filled with furniture arrived from New Jersey. The manifest looked clean, but inside, hidden behind false panels, was over £2 million worth of uncut cocaine. It passed through customs without inspection, thanks to a few envelopes handed to the right officials. When the shipment reached its destination in an empty warehouse outside Bootle, Elias watched silently as Kane's men unloaded the boxes. He said nothing, but the small smirk on his face said enough. The system worked. Over the next 6 months, shipments grew larger. What began as occasional deliveries turned into a steady flow of containers. Inside them were drugs, firearms, counterfeit notes, and stolen technology, all hidden in plain sight. The Americans used legitimate companies as fronts, blending illegal goods with regular cargo. Kane's crew handled the offloading, moving the products to hidden storage units across Liverpool. From there, they were distributed across Europe through trucking routes that no authority thought to check. Elias never appeared at the docks again after that first night. He stayed invisible, running everything through coded messages and intermediaries. His strength was control through absence. People feared a man they couldn't see. Every penny was tracked, every deal recorded, and every man paid on time. The Americans called it Operation Gateway, but the perfection of the system was also its weakness. With each successful shipment, the operation became bolder, and word began to spread through the underworld. Local gangs started asking questions. The port workers whispered about new faces, expensive cars, and cash changing hands in the dark. Liverpool was waking up, and so were its rivals. Elias had built the perfect machine, but in the shadows of the docks, someone else was already watching, waiting for their chance to take it all. Elias Rourke knew that money could open doors, but power kept them from closing. After the success of the first few shipments, he understood that to stay invisible in Liverpool, he needed the locals, the ones who ruled the streets, who could control information before it reached the police. That's when he set his eyes on Declan Moore, a name that still carried weight in the city's criminal circles despite years of silence. Declan had once controlled Liverpool's docks with his own gang, the Mersey Blades, before a failed turf war sent him to prison. Now free, older but not weaker, he was desperate to rebuild his influence. Elias saw an opportunity, and so did Declan. Their meeting was arranged quietly through Kane Doyle, who trusted Declan but didn't trust the calm confidence of the American strategist. Elias came with a simple offer: money, roots, and protection. Declan would handle distribution across Europe, using his old connections in Amsterdam, Dublin, and Marseille. In return, the American crew would supply everything he needed and handle international logistics. For Declan, it meant power restored. For Elias, it meant a shield that no outsider could penetrate. Soon, Liverpool became more than just a port. It became a nerve center. The docks buzzed at night with activity that looked routine, but was anything but. Declan's men moved the cargo under false manifests, replacing documents, rerouting trucks, and ensuring that every delivery left no trace. Kane supervised the dock operations, while Declan reactivated his street network to move the products discreetly through local businesses, auto shops, fish warehouses, even pubs. Every location had a purpose. Every person had a role. The operation ran like a living organism, each part feeding the other. The profits were staggering. Money poured in faster than they could clean it. Elias set up offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, while Declan funneled cash through shell companies in London. For a time, they both believed they were untouchable. The Americans had technology, and the locals had loyalty. Together, they controlled the most efficient smuggling network the UK had seen in decades. But success brings shadows. Within Declan's circle, whispers began. Some of his old loyalists felt they were being pushed aside by outsiders. Among them was Logan Fry, Declan's second-in-command, a man whose loyalty was as unstable as his temper. He didn't trust the Americans and saw Elias as growing control as a threat to everything the locals had built. The partnership that started as mutual respect slowly began to crack under greed and suspicion. Meanwhile, Elias sensed the tension but didn't interfere. He believed that fear kept men in line, and Declan's problems were his to solve. Yet Kane noticed the changes, the uneasy glances, the missing shipments, the quiet meetings at night. Something was shifting beneath the surface, and it wasn't just ambition. Declan's gang had begun to fracture from the inside, and Logan's resentment was spreading like poison. Liverpool's underworld was never stable for long. The alliance between the American crew and the Mersey Blades had made both rich, but now it was making them reckless. And in a city built on secrets and survival, recklessness always comes with a price. Logan Fry had always lived in Declan Moore's shadow, watching his leader rebuild power with the help of foreign money. At first, he accepted the arrangement because the profits were real, and the city was theirs again. But as time passed, Logan began to notice things that didn't sit right. The Americans weren't just partners anymore. They were taking control. Elias Rourke's coded messages dictated every move, every shipment, every payment. Declan had stopped making decisions without approval from across the ocean. To Logan, that wasn't partnership. It was surrender. The breaking point came one night when a shipment arrived late, and Declan refused to let Logan handle it. Instead, he handed everything over to Kane Doyle, the dockman who had once been nothing more than a low-level hustler. Logan watched as Kane's men took over the operation, while Declan smiled, pretending everything was fine. That night, Logan made a decision that would change everything. If Elias and Declan thought they could control Liverpool, he would remind them who really owned the streets. Using contacts from his past, Logan reached out to a rival Irish network based in Belfast men who had once fought Declan's crew years ago. He offered them something valuable: insider information about the American crew's shipment routes, schedules, and safe houses. In return, he wanted support money, weapons, and a promise that when the Americans were gone, he would control the docks again. The Irish gang agreed, and within weeks, 3 major shipments vanished. Containers worth millions disappeared mid-transit, leaving no trace behind. When the losses were discovered, panic swept through the ranks. Elias didn't raise his voice or make threats. He simply went silent. That silence scared everyone more than anger ever could. Declan accused Kane of carelessness. Kane blamed customs officers, and no one dared to suggest what Elias already knew. Someone inside was feeding information. Elias called in a man from the States, Victor Crane, known in the underworld for his efficiency. Victor's arrival changed the air in Liverpool. He was calm, polite, and cold as steel. Within days, he began collecting names, tracing phone calls, and watching who met whom. His methods were silent but ruthless. One by one, people who knew too much started disappearing. Logan realized too late that the Americans were closing in. The Irish network cut contact, fearing exposure. Then, one morning, a body was found floating in the canal, an Irish smuggler who had arranged the stolen shipments. Pinned to his jacket was a note written in black ink. "Loyalty has a price." The message spread across the city, and every gang member knew exactly what it meant. Declan pretended the problem was solved, but Elias knew better. Trust had been broken, and once it breaks, it never heals. From that day, every man in the network looked over his shoulder, unsure who was next. The silence in Liverpool had returned, but it wasn't peace, it was fear. And Elias, watching from the shadows, understood that the true enemy wasn't outside. It was already inside the circle, waiting for another chance to strike. The chaos that followed the betrayals had barely settled when a new threat quietly slipped into Liverpool's criminal underworld. His name was Harvey Quinn, a truck driver by appearance, quiet and reliable, the kind of man no one noticed or questioned. But Harvey wasn't who he seemed. He was an undercover MI5 operative, sent to infiltrate the smuggling routes that had turned Liverpool's docks into the center of an international crime web. His mission was clear: find proof of the American crew's involvement, trace the money, and bring down the network from within. Harvey had been preparing for months. He studied the docks, memorized faces, and learned the rhythms of the shipments. He was patient, knowing that one mistake could cost him his life. By the time he joined Kane Doyle's crew as a driver, the operation had grown so large that no one paid attention to another new recruit. Every week, he transported crates that he never opened, containers that were sealed tight and labeled with fake company names. But Harvey was trained to notice the small things: the same names on documents, the unusual weight of containers, and the unmarked vans that followed at a distance. Bit by bit, he began piecing the puzzle together. He took photos with a hidden camera disguised as a keychain, recorded conversations near the docks, and wrote coded notes that were passed secretly to his handler. Over time, he gathered enough evidence to expose half the operation: the names of corrupt officials, the fake shipping companies, and the bank accounts used for laundering. But what he didn't know was that Victor Crane had already started to suspect him. Victor trusted no one, not even Declan or Kane. He had noticed irregularities in Harvey's driving logs, routes that didn't match the manifests, small delays that no one else questioned. When 2 minor drivers disappeared after being seen talking to Harvey, Victor's doubts became certainty. He began following him quietly, tracking his movements from the docks to the warehouse district. One night, Victor broke into Harvey's locker and found a note with a coded number sequence, something no normal dock worker would have. Elias Rourke was informed immediately. Instead of ordering Harvey's death, Elias made an unusual decision. He wanted him alive. There was something about the precision of Harvey's work that intrigued him. Maybe he could use him, or maybe he just wanted to know how deep the investigation had gone. A trap was set. Harvey was told to make a delivery at midnight to a warehouse on the edge of the city. He sensed something was off, but he couldn't refuse without blowing his cover. As he arrived, the gates closed behind him. Victor stepped out of the shadows with two men. A struggle broke out, and Harvey barely escaped through a side door, wounded but alive. In his rush, he left behind everything, except one thing. Elias's encrypted phone had been on the table during the confrontation, and in the chaos, Harvey grabbed it. That single act changed everything. Inside the phone were details of every transaction, route, and name tied to the American crew. Harvey vanished into the night, leaving behind a city about to explode. Elias's perfect empire had finally been exposed from the inside. The news spread through Liverpool like wildfire. Within days of Harvey Quinn's escape, the city's criminal network began to collapse under the weight of its own secrets. The encrypted phone he had taken was more than just a device. It was a roadmap to Elias Rourke's empire. Every shipment, every payment, every name involved in the smuggling routes was there. When MI5 decrypted it, they discovered connections stretching from Liverpool to Rotterdam, Marseille, and even New York. Overnight, the British authorities launched one of the largest coordinated raids in the country's history. At dawn, unmarked vans stormed the docks. Helicopters hovered over warehouses, while police units moved in with precision. The operation was swift and brutal. Hundreds of workers were detained, accounts were frozen, and properties were seized. Kane Doyle was caught first, trying to escape on a cargo ship bound for Spain. He didn't resist. He knew it was over. Declan Moore was captured hours later in a safe house outside Toxteth, surrounded by armed police. His empire, built on years of violence and loyalty, crumbled in a single morning. But Elias Rourke was gone. The one man everyone wanted had disappeared without leaving a trace. Investigators later discovered that he had boarded a private flight for Manchester 3 days before the raids began, using a fake identity and forged travel records. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving his partners to face the consequences. To most, it looked like he had been outsmarted by fate, but to those who knew him, it was clear. Elias had planned the collapse. He had anticipated the breach from the moment Harvey escaped. The network had grown too large, too noisy, and too dependent on unreliable allies. Elias had decided to burn it all down and start again somewhere else. The raids that destroyed his operation also wiped out all traces of his identity. The money was already gone, transferred into shell companies and crypto accounts weeks before. Declan and Kane were nothing more than pawns sacrificed to save the king. In prison, Declan refused to talk. He sat through every interrogation in silence, staring at the walls, replaying the choices that had led him to ruin. Kane, however, couldn't bear the weight of betrayal. He confessed everything, revealing how the Americans had used the port, how the bribes worked, and how Elias manipulated every deal. His statements confirmed what the investigators suspected. Liverpool had been just one chapter in a much larger global network. Across Europe, authorities raided related hubs in Belgium and the Netherlands, but they found nothing concrete. Elias had erased his fingerprints from every part of the operation. By the time officials traced the last offshore account, the money had vanished. What remained was chaos, empty warehouses, broken alliances, and the haunting sense that the mastermind was still watching from somewhere far away. In the streets of Liverpool, silence returned once again. The docks were under new security, the gangs scattered or jailed, and yet the fear never truly left. Everyone who had worked under Elias knew he wasn't finished. The American crew didn't fall. It adapted. Somewhere across the sea, Elias Rourke was already rebuilding, and this time he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Years passed, but the memory of the American crew's reign in Liverpool never faded. The city still bore the scars of their empire: abandoned warehouses, burnt-out cars, and men who vanished without explanation. For the police, the case was officially closed, but for those who lived in the underworld, it was far from over. Whispers began to spread across Europe's ports. strange shipments arriving under new company names, unregistered cargo vessels docking in Antwerp and Rotterdam, and coded symbols painted on containers. To anyone else, they meant nothing. But to those who had once worked under Elias Rourke, they were unmistakable. The American crew had returned, only now they were ghosts. The media called it the Phantom Network. No one could trace it. No one could prove it existed, yet its influence was felt everywhere. Small-time criminals suddenly had access to impossible amounts of cash. New synthetic drugs flooded the markets, perfectly distributed, impossible to trace. The fingerprints of Elias's strategy were there, quiet, efficient, invisible. Investigators who once studied the Liverpool case began to notice the same financial patterns, repeating in different countries, like echoes of a ghost they could never catch. In Belgium, customs officers intercepted a shipment labeled as auto parts that turned out to contain high-grade weapons. The serial numbers on the crates matched those once used in Liverpool's operations. In Spain, a fisherman found an unmarked container washed ashore with codes identical to those used in Elias's files. The evidence was circumstantial, but the pattern was undeniable. The network hadn't died, it had evolved. Behind the scenes, intelligence reports hinted that Elias was alive, operating under a new identity somewhere in Eastern Europe. He no longer worked with local gangs, he controlled them. Every move was cleaner, smarter, hidden behind layers of technology and offshore funding. Some said he used AI-driven logistics systems to reroute shipments automatically if authorities got too close. Others claimed he had forged connections with political figures and business elites who offered protection in exchange for silent profits. Whether those stories were true or not, one thing was certain. Elias Rourke had become more myth than man. In Liverpool, Declan Moore's name faded into history. Kane Doyle's confession became part of police archives, and Victor Crane was never seen again. Yet the fear of Elias lingered, a ghostly reminder that power doesn't vanish. It transforms. Every year, new faces appeared at the docks, ambitious young smugglers chasing the same dream, unaware they were stepping into the shadow of a legend. Late one night, a dock worker in Rotterdam found a crate marked with a faint symbol, an eagle carved into the wood, identical to the one used by the American crew years ago. When investigators arrived the next morning, the crate was gone, and so was the worker who reported it. Liverpool had been the beginning, not the end. Elias Rourke had used it as a test, a lesson in control and disappearance. Now his empire stretched beyond borders, beyond names, beyond the reach of law. The American crew was no longer a gang. It was an invisible system, a global phantom empire that thrived in the spaces between law and crime. And as the tides rose and fell along the European coast, one truth remained: the gateway he opened in Liverpool was still wide open, waiting for the next chapter of ghosts to walk through.